And we're live! Hey, everybody! This is at Doc Foreman. If you've stumbled across this, good luck. This is hashtag SPSM. It's the Suicide Prevention Social Media Chat. And now that you know it, you can't unknow it. I'm particularly excited. I feel like I say that every week, but we really enjoy the content that we're bringing to you. And tonight we are going to be discussing Rick and Morty. For those of you who don't know what that's about, Bart Andrews, until very recently, shared your pain, and he's going to talk a little bit about having Rick and Morty envy. We're going to talk a little bit about depictions of suicide that I think are pretty interesting in this particular animation franchise. But we have just the best guests today. We have the folks from the Jedi Counsel, who many of you know on Twitter. We have Katie Gordon, and we have Brandon Saxton. Hopefully I get their names right. God only knows. God only knows what I'll do by the end. I'm at Doc Foreman, psychologist, co-producer, co-moderator, and with that, I will turn it over to Tony Wood. Tony, say hi to the people.
Hi, everybody. I'm Tony Wood. I'm the chair of the board of the American Association of Suicidology, as well as working for a groovy little startup called Quantify. We started a project called ourdatahelps.org. Donate your social media data for mental health today. And heck, if you're not a member of AAS, join AAS. You heard it here. Maybe not first, but you definitely heard it here. Chris Maxwell,
woo!
What are you doing?
And heck. Hey, everybody. I'm Chris Maxwell. I work for the largest national suicide prevention hotline in the country. I also serve as for the AAS Strategic Media Response Task Force. And I help out with SPSM stuff, and so I'm really excited. I am a super huge fan of Rick and Morty as of probably 3 or 4 months ago. Been following it since then, have watched every episode at least twice. Loving it, and really excited to hear about how really just the subtlety of the way that they insert mental health into the show in a really sincere way is thrilling to me. So I'm really excited to hear some real experts on these kinds of programs and opportunities, like to hear what they have to say. So I'm just really thrilled to be here.
And Dr. Bart Andrews.
First, let me say, Tony, groovy is my adjective for BHR when I do the intro on the show. I mean, yeah, we talked about this, and I felt like we had an understanding. Like you seemed like you heard me. I heard you. There was an acknowledgement on your part that you weren't gonna say the groovy because that's my shtick. That's my bit.
Did I have a? Did we have a written agreement about that?
No, Tony, we didn't. I trusted. I think that I trusted.
Let me check my notes.
Okay. Hey, everybody out there in SPSM land. I am super excited about the show. My name is Dr. Bart Andrews. I am at Behavioral Health Response.
Fantastic,
Tony. An amazing little crisis line in St. Louis, Missouri. We're 21, 22, 23 years in existence. It just keeps going up and up and up, Tony Wood.
It's linear.
I am super excited about the show. You have no idea. We're gonna hold off because we want to hear from our guests who, if you haven't checked out.
Bart,
what?
Discuss like your relationship with Rick and Morty over the last couple of weeks. Discuss like how we got here.
Okay, so I'll talk about. It's been hurtful. I'll say that. Some of us who are not going to be named have illegal access to Rick and Morty. Others of us have legitimate access to Rick and Morty. I do not have access to Rick. I did not have access to Rick and Morty. So they've been talking, Tony and Chris and April have been talking about Rick and Morty nonstop and how amazing it is, blah, blah, blah. And I asked them respectfully, I said, I don't get to watch Rick and Morty. I don't have access. Can we tone it down on this? Because it's really hard. It's hard for me. I was left out. I felt left out, right? And so the truth of the matter is the way that they respected me and my space was by ramping up the Rick and Morty conversation until finally I broke down I got the Rick and Morty. I got on the Hulu only to find out. So this is funny. Yeah, nod. Yeah, go ahead, Brandon and Katie, nod. I got on the Hulu. First of all, Hulu, if you're watching, your interface sucks, Hulu. So let me just be really clear about the Hulu, that whoever designed your site needs a serious talking to. Upper management, word up. This guy or woman sucks. Two, so then I had to actually get the episodes and so then I was listening to the Jedi Counsel podcast. There's 3. There could have been 4. In fact, Brandon and Katie were talking about having a 4th. They teased us with a 4, and then they pulled back on the 4. So they said they were thinking about a 4, but they pulled back. And Katie and Brandon, I'm just going to say this: maybe if there would have been less Frasier talk, we could have had more Rick and Morty time. Not that bothered me; it didn't. Okay, one of the things. So then I find out that I've got to watch the episodes that they're talking about, and the dialogue, the conversation that we'll get to was amazing. Then I had to get on Amazon and get completely and totally monopolized by Amazon, who owns us all, and I had to give Amazon even more money. Like Amazon doesn't have enough money already to watch season 3 episodes. And I have to say that I think, having skipped through some seasons, I think season 3 is the best season.
I agree.
I think they're getting better at this, and the show is absolutely, there's so much in each episode that you can rewatch it. I mean, it's incredible how much they pack into these things. And so now I'm one of the cool kids, but I'm sure that April and Tony and Chris will find something else that I don't have access to make me feel excluded, because it's kind of their shtick.
And I'm not saying we exclude Bart to feel better about ourselves, but I'm just going to say we feel pretty good about ourselves. I'm so excited about tonight's guest. We are so lucky to have the Jedi Counsel. Remember, we told you 2017 is the year of the podcast. And we have some other folks who are podcasters in mental health, very similar to Chris Walker, but they have a different setup. And this is so great. You know, we have Dr. Jonathan Singer, who does a social work podcast. We have Chris Walker, who does the mental health news radio. We have the Jedi Counsel, and they do a very different sort of setup, and they approach mental health topics from, again, a very, very different way. All of these are very compelling. Brandon, Katie, why don't you say hi to the people?
Hi, people. I wanted to actually address Bart just for a second. So we teased the 4th Rick and Morty episode. The reason that we didn't go through with it is because we're actually considering starting a sole Rick and Morty podcast that will break down each episode and the underlying psychology or mental health in it. So we figured if there was ever going to be a Rick and Morty psychology podcast, we had to stop covering it on Jedi Counsel, or we wouldn't leave any content for us if we actually got that far.
I'm excited.
I feel bad to leave you hanging there, but it looks like there will be more Rick and Morty psychology content coming eventually from us.
And my next question is, will you do Steven Universe?
That's a great question, and I don't have a good answer for you yet.
I don't know Steven Universe.
I'm not sure I do either.
That's charming. It's not nearly as psycho-drama-ish.
Actually, it really, really is. So you should know, things like Rick and Morty are animation things, and these folks are related. So if you watch Adventure Time, then the people who are responsible for Adventure Time, some of them are doing Rick and Morty, and some of them are doing Steven Universe. And you'll notice a bunch of design similarities, but really interesting themes about wellness, coping, like development, healthy like childhood development and things like that. You'll just love it. But anyway, back to Katie and Brandon.
Yes. So maybe I'll just talk a little bit about Jedi Counsel really quick and kind of tell people about what we do. So we started Jedi Counsel just like over a year ago? No, longer than that now. Well, what doesn't? Between 1 and 2 years ago.
A year and a half.
A year and a half, yeah.
Is that all? Because I feel like you guys have been around forever.
It feels that way sometimes for us too.
I think we started March of 2016.
Yeah, that sounds about right.
That was our first post on Darth Vader.
And that's where it started. It was actually blog posts. So Katie and I were having these conversations, usually on Facebook, like, oh, well, you know, there's a new Star Wars coming out. Well, which character do you like? I like Darth Vader, blah, 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 blah. And we thought these conversations were interesting, and then we thought other people might think that they're interesting. So we put it together in a blog post and threw it up on the internet, and come to find out a few people read it. we thought that was kind of fun. So we kept going with it, and we thought this is an interesting way to get accurate mental health information out, because people are interested in these fictional characters that they're so familiar with, particularly characters like Darth Vader that have this very rich sort of history and are very compelling characters. So we got started on these blog posts, and then we said, boy, wouldn't it be funny if we started a podcast? And then we started a podcast. And it started a little rough. We were recording with this very laptop with like this sound recorder and uploading it onto like Windows Movie Maker and putting it on YouTube. So we did our best, and things have improved since then. So really, it evolved, and it took us a little while to kind of figure out what exactly was the format. Because we have like an episode where we just watch The Office, for example, and talk about that. And that's fun, and we enjoy that. Yes, we love The Office.
It's about Dwight. What did you say about Dwight Schrute?
We have a whole
we
fake psychological report on Dwight.
It's
actually.
true. Yes, Dwight and Michael and Kelly. So yeah.
And Kelly Kapoor.
Yeah, so it started off like, or even there's one episode where we just read mean internet comments about Kylo Ren. We're like, why do people not like Kylo Ren? He's cool.
Because of his ears.
There is something to be said. So it took us a little bit to sort of figure out.
Yeah, FLK, funny looking kid. Seriously, like, which is like in mental health, they talk about funny looking kid, and like people sort of interact, and he's kind of funny looking, and I'd be like, yeah, people mess with him if he were. Anyway, keep going.
Yeah, so it sort of took us a little bit to figure out the format and the way that we kind of design the episodes now. So the blog posts, we'll start there. They're designed as like pseudo-psychoanalytical reports, kind of like you might see where we just break down what's the presenting problem, who might have referred them, and it's based, we try to be clear or explicit about what we base it on. So it might be based on a certain line of comics or a certain season or a certain episode or whatever it might be for that character. The podcast usually is designed around picking one specific character and linking them to either one specific mental health disorder or a mental health construct or treatment. So things like we had the Pickle Rick and Family Therapy episodes. We try to frame all of our episodes to be that way, where there's one fictional character in the title and one psychology topic somewhere.
Oh, I didn't realize you were doing that, but now I get it.
Yeah, that's kind of how we tried to break down all of the episodes. And sometimes they're not always that clean. So like when we covered 13 Reasons Why, for example, it was just 13 Reasons Why, because there was so much content, we couldn't pair it off to just one thing for each of the episodes quite cleanly. But that's generally the format that we try to do. And in that, we tried to talk about how, if it's an intentional depiction of mental health, how is that depiction? Is it accurate? Is it compassionate? And if it's not an intentional depiction of a mental health problem, we talk about what might speculate what might be the underlying mental health problem for this character individual, and what can we learn about that, and how might that depiction add or reduce to stigma or overall general understanding of mental health in the public.
And we also make sure, real important to us, is that we name the mental health problem and that we link to the evidence-based treatment or treatments that have been shown to be effective with the disorders.
Yeah, we do a fair bit of speculating with the characters, because we don't always have time to consume all of the media for a specific character, but we do take a lot of time to make sure we're being really precise and accurate with the mental health information, because that's really the point of Jedi Counsel, is to disseminate that information in a way that's interesting and accessible to anyone.
I loved in your I listened to a bunch of episodes in preparation for today, and there was one comment that you made, and I don't remember where, but you were, well, two, like one where you were talking about Frasier, like, and you said, and I always sort of, Frasier is very funny, but poor depiction of actually what it is to be a shrink.
Yeah.
And that they do, that the show is structured around the stages of grief. And you even say, well, for entertainment purposes, we clearly understand, and they sort of explain it, and there's some nuance. And I thought that was just a fair treatment of that. And then you say something really clever at a different point in maybe another podcast, where you're talking about how cognitive behavioral therapy is mentioned by name all the time as a throwaway, but we've never actually seen probably a good depiction of that in the media. Right?
I think that's true as far as the media that I've consumed, and certainly it's probably too much or more than anyone in graduate students should consume, but there's certainly some that I've missed.
When I think of things like Goodwill Hunting was so big when I was coming up, and I'm like, there's no universe where the therapist is going to end you.
Yes.
Where Robin Williams is going to help you have an insight by throttling you. I thought that was it was very fair. So what I particularly liked about the podcast, for those of you, if you go to spsmchat.com You're going to have links to their sort of overall content, and then links to some content that might be of interest to folks specifically in the SPSM community, to the 13 Reasons Why episodes, things like that. Do go check that out. Totally worth listening to, like, on your drive. These are great podcasts for, like, especially if you are in the mental health world. A lot of what they're talking about is going to be like stuff that you're kind of a nerd for anyway, which I think is pretty great. I was monologuing and I had a moment to get to. What I particularly like is that it is all very fairly presented. Cannot emphasize enough that I felt like you guys are, like, really treating things in sort of an even-handed way. So, like, not outrage or not, not expecting unrealistic things from entertainment, stuff like that.
Well, thank you. We definitely try to take that approach. So I'm glad that it means a lot that it comes off that way.
Yeah, we try to balance thinking about, of course, the people who create the media have a job to do. They have to write something that's compelling and interesting and draws in viewers. And we try to balance the sort of cost benefit of doing that and the potential harm that media can do, depending on the depiction and whether or not it provides misinformation or facilitates or leads to further stigma. Then that's something where we get a little bit harsher, I think, with our critique. But usually, I appreciate that. We try to be very even-handed and consider not everyone has the same background and training that we're fortunate enough to have, or others.
Yeah, I do think even if you don't have a mental health background, if you were curious about it, I really do think that your show is like, you follow it. I don't think you guys are very jargony during the show, which I also appreciate.
Oh, good. I'm glad to hear that. We definitely try not to be too jargony. Mm-hmm. We catch ourselves sometimes being jargony and try to switch quickly.
One of us might say to the other one, "Do you think that people will know what that term means, or something like that?" I think it comes from.
Heard you do that.
Yeah, I think that's our very gentle way of saying, "Oh, hold on." Like,
what you're saying, nobody understands. So we might as well. We both have taught and teach abnormal psychology to undergraduate students, and I think that's helped us to think about what is. Basically, what do we need to explain? Where is our audience? And we actually, I think podcasts that are for mental health professionals, I value those a lot. Mm-hmm. We're actually trying to talk to mental health professionals, hopefully too, but also people who have an interest in mental health and want some basic information about it and don't have it. And that's kind of the level we try to talk about it at.
Yeah, we very, very much try to have it so anyone can pick it up and listen to it and have a good idea of what we're talking about.
Well, and that's like you're dealing with these fictional characters that have franchises that often have very developed backstories, and that, like, so people have, like, this wonderful case study that they're already familiar with. So I think that's like a very, very clever structure. So before we get into Rick and Morty, how do you guys pick what you're going to cover when?
That's a great question, and there's not a very clear answer to it. It started with, what do you want to talk about, or who's your favorite character? And it sort of devolved in, we take a lot of requests. So for a while, we were backlogging and just doing anything that we thought was interesting. Now we're trying to stay on top of things that are more prevalent, that maybe more people will be interested in hearing about, instead of what we're just interested in talking about. So, like, when 13 Reasons Why was really big, of course, that seemed like a really natural thing for us to discuss, just because everyone was talking about it. Rick and Morty is another example like that, too. I would say Rick and Morty and BoJack Horseman are by far, in a way, the shows that are recommended to us more than any other. So it was...
BoJack Horseman?
Yeah, neither of us has seen it.
I have. But no, my husband and my daughter, should I say that my 11-year-old likes that show? Because that's probably, I would not say that I let her watch it. I'm just saying that she found it.
Okay. Yeah, I haven't seen it, so there's no judgment on my end.
No, once you do, you'll be like, she is the worst mom. I was like, how do you know what that is? She's like, it's on the internet. I'm like, you'll like Steven Universe, because it is for kids and grown-ups can watch with it. You'll like that.
Sure.
So, like, my daughter and I, like, watch that together religiously. So let's do an entrance into the Rick and Morty. Mm-hmm. And my awareness of this sort of happened as Chris Maxwell, who is my all things cool influencer. Like, Chris Maxwell's like, have you guys read? Have you listened to? Or Bart and Chris are great. And I was like, so I started watching it, and my kids came out, and they're like, oh, good, you're finally getting caught up this summer, Mom. Which was how that started. Explain a little bit about what Rick and Morty is about.
Sure. Rick and Morty, I tweeted the other day, there was a hashtag for, like, poorly explained TV shows. And my tweet for it was, a grandfather and a grandson go on adventures, which is like a one-sentence summary that doesn't capture the show really well. but that's what I tweeted. So that's really the idea. So you have the title character is Rick and Morty. Rick is the grandfather, Morty is his grandson, and there's the rest of the family too. Rick's daughter Beth, her husband Jerry, and Morty's summer sister. And the story starts off with Rick coming back into their lives, and Rick is sort of this kind of arrogant but supremely intelligent being, or, well, human, I guess, presumably, depending on the universe. And then throughout the show, Rick goes on various adventures and brings Morty with him, and they get into all sorts of trouble, but Rick usually finds a way out, and Morty usually tries to survive as the best that he can. I don't know. That's a really quick summary, I guess.
And I know that I did a lot of like sort of homework for prepping for the show. It's Justin Roiland, I believe, behind it. Says that, you know, a lot of influence about the art and also sort of about the format is from things like The Simpsons, Family Guy, what is it? Dad.
American
Dad. Like that's it's irreverent, dysfunctional family, really, really loves each other.
Yes.
But with Rick and Morty, there is all of this stuff related to time travel, science, and science fiction that happens. So they're able to use that to play with ideas in a rather engaging way. But it's but every episode's usually fairly complicated and fairly fast moving. Would that be fair?
I would think that would be very fair and much more succinctly said than my summary.
and I hate to break in, but this should be related to our Doctor Who episode, because that's ultimately what Rick and Morty is. It's a play on Doctor Who.
Yeah.
Maniacal, evil Doctor Who.
The music, the intro music sort of sounds similar. Like I heard some of the sounds and I went, that sounds like the Doctor Who intro.
Yeah, it sure does.
It's purposeful.
So real quick, Chris, Bart, do you want to check in a little bit about Rick and Morty and why you think it's engaging?
Chris, jump in.
It's so engaging, and I think one of the things that makes this show so good, and we just kind of touched on this, is that there is so much crammed in to each episode. Justin Roiland and Dan Harmon and the rest of the writers put so much into every episode that you really do just have to be paying attention. You have to catch each little thing, but at the same time you don't. One of Rick's favorite things to say is, don't think about it too much, Morty. Don't think about it. So you can still enjoy everything that's going on screen. You can enjoy the dynamic. You can mostly get the relationship aspects that happen from character to character without having any real idea what's happening in terms of actual plot line. So it still makes it connectable, relatable to the characters themselves and the things that they're dealing with. Bart shared with us a while ago this really great video talking about the shift in narratives over the last 10 or so years in entertainment, from cynicism to sincerity. And there are a lot of shows that we see this happening with, like The Office and Parks and Rec. And BoJack Horseman is obviously one of those, and I would definitely put Rick and Morty into this characteristic. Into this category. But what we see in Rick and Morty, there's just bullshit happening a majority of the time, and then there are these little hints of sincerity, like Rick clearly having feelings for Morty when he sees flashbacks of Morty's life, and he starts tearing, and the evil Rick goes, "Oh, are you getting ready to cry?" And he's like, "No, I'm just allergic to bullshit." So there's some clear happening with each of these characters that, and Dan Harmon is really good at this. He did this in Community as well when he was writing for them, when he was show running for them. So there's just this really sincere aspect to it, and there's just so much packed into it that it's just, you don't have to really focus that hard on it. Kind of layered in with all this really great stuff.
You don't have to, but like you can. I will tell you, I always watch like where I am like looking up synopses of the episodes and I'm like watching with like the internet helping me, because I have to say I often do not feel smart enough to watch it without help.
Yeah, no, it's great. It's great to go onto YouTube after an episode, or like a day after an episode airs, and try to get one of the rundown clips, or Reddit. The subreddit for Rick and Morty they have post-episode discussions where people will lay out new fan theories as more information is provided. Just be careful that you don't fall down that rabbit hole too late.
Bart, what do you think? You're newer to Rick and Morty.
I'm newer, and I think one of the things that was really interesting to me was I listened to the 3 podcasts of the Jedi Counsel podcast before I watched the bulk of the episodes that I've watched, right? So I had seen like an episode, so I had seen like an episode and a half before listening to the 3 podcasts, and listening to the podcast made me really want to get into the show, right? So I think one of the things, if you're not one of these folks that's worried about spoiler alerts, being able to have that kind of conversation and that Brandon and Katie had about the show was intriguing to me. And then jumping into the show, lots of things hit me. And one of the things that I really came in with having watched about 6-7 episodes at this point across the 3 seasons, there's lots of metaphors. And I think that this is going to sound strange, but as I watch this, Rick is really a metaphor to me for modern day technological capitalism, right? It's this unrestrained self-interest, keep moving forward no matter what, right? It doesn't make any difference what the cost is as long as we keep moving forward. And it's really interesting because we pay lip service to, if you look at our culture, we pay lip service to a lot of things that we say that are important, but if you look at the dynamics going on in our economics and our culture, it really is all speed ahead, whatever it takes to keep moving forward, and that's what we're doing. And that's kind of Rick. But even though Rick does that, you can't get away from the people. And so it was really interesting. Brandon and Katie had a great conversation about what motivates Rick. The only thing we do know that motivates Rick, that's a given, right? It's that whole concept of if somebody you're talking to at risk of suicide and they're telling you, I've got no reason to live, but they're still on the phone with you or they're still talking to you. So you know there's something there, right? It's stepping step. But Rick, this connection he has to his family is absolutely unbreakable, right? So whatever it is, he couldn't keep away from the family. He keeps coming back to the family. It's hard to know with the different plot lines and the different versions and his origin story that then turns out to be he made it up. Maybe he did, maybe he didn't. But clearly family is important to him. Even in his constant struggle to meet his own self-interest, he keeps coming back to the family. And just when you think he's going to completely bail, he always finds a way to bring it back, right? And there's a truism to that. And I think this battle that we're facing between our individual needs, and we've become a very individualized culture, this battle we have to meet our individual needs and also be a part of a group. And I think that's one of the true battles that we're fighting culturally as we move forward, is this constant give and take between our immediate individual self-interest and what's good for the group and being connected to the group around us. And I think that that's very compelling to me. And I know that's really long-winded, but there's a theme and you see it in almost every single episode, and it's really incredible.
So Katie and Brandon, this is the part on Sprockets where we ask you to tell us about a really specific time on Rick and Morty. So you're going to, we realize that we're not going to be able to really fully explain all the plot arc of Rick and Morty, but we want to talk about Rick's suicide attempt. For those of you who might not want to talk about this, that is understandable. Please take care of yourselves, because we are going to be discussing means. But these are highly science fictional means. No one that I know has ever died by suicide this way. But the sort of the arc of the suicide attempt and what happens was sort of interesting. So I'm wondering if you guys would talk about that.
Sure. So Rick goes with Summer and Morty and into another dimension, I guess, or into another world, and runs into someone he used to date, who is actually a person who takes over other people's bodies, and called Unity, who basically has everyone agree on the same thing. So it's, in a way, it's kind of it's the exact opposite of what Bart just described as going on in Rick and Morty's daily life, in that they're all connected, but that's because they're the same person, and they take over real people's bodies to do that. And so Rick is having a good time being his kind of hedonistic self and having a great time. And what happens, though, is that Unity decides to break it off with him, because she said that even though she usually takes over other people's bodies and things like that, when he's around, she changes to be more like him. And basically that ruins her. And it seems like, for someone who seems callous a lot of the time, it seems to really bother him that happened. He seems more down than I've seen him. And so then he goes back to the house and he just says to I think it's to, basically he doesn't want to leave, but then he decides to go, and he says to his family, I'm just going to go out into the garage. Very solemn, very quiet, and then walks out there. Yeah, unlike him, right? He's usually kind of this energetic and talks in that particular way. And then he has a vaporizer. What would you call that?
Some sort of laser weapon. That, I guess that's how I would describe it. But
Laser.
yeah, that's what I would call it. Yeah.
Yeah, and so he has some kind of creature, and at first he holds it in front of the vaporizer to see if it works, and kind of pets it, and then it vaporizes, and then he drinks some kind of primer or some kind of fluid and points the vaporizer at him, expecting the same thing will happen that happened to that creature, but he appears to pass out, maybe because he's intoxicated from alcohol use or something like that, and it shoots above his head, and he doesn't die by that.
So I watched this. I actually watched this clip multiple times, because also, like, when he's petting the weird creature, and like, there's just parts of it that are not part of my script about lethal means. So you sort of have to read it, but all the emotional arc, in fact, really is. So there's a relationship break, there's a change in behavior, there's a withdrawal from the family. He goes out to the garage, and the garage is like his sort of his genius lair, his mad scientist lair. And he has access to lethal means everywhere. And he, you know, like over 80% of suicides, there's intoxication appears to be involved. And like many, you know, when it comes to suicide, a much smaller percentage die, but many people attempt. And in fact, Rick seems to be one of them. And then what happens after the suicide attempt?
In that episode, I think that's it. I think that's it. He's just passed out, and I think it just pans back and it plays solemn music and then rolls credits. Unless I'm remembering it wrong.
Okay, good. Because I was like not following what's the follow-up to the suicide attempt? Chris, can you help us out, Maxwell?
No, that's it. You nailed it, Brandon.
Yeah, I think because I remember that episode because it stood out to me so much, because it was one of the first episodes of Rick and Morty that really kind of hit me in a big way. And I was like, this show, you know, it's a lot of laughs and they have it pretty lighthearted, but that was pretty serious. And that was really when I started to really get interested and engaged in that show, because just to depict that and then roll away and roll credits, I was like, that's not something I've seen in a TV show before, particularly a cartoon they sort of sells itself as being humorous.
And I think one of the really sad aspects, that music is just so sad. And then they kind of pan out to Jerry is using the weed whacker or whatever, the reason he went into the garage in the first place. And his family is clueless that there's anything different that's going on with Rick, right? They kind of, I mean, earlier in the episode, Jerry and Beth are arguing about him and the impact on the family, but they don't see anything different going on in that situation. I thought that was really heartbreaking, the way that was depicted.
But also really subtle, right?
Yes,
yes. So I know it's Suicide Prevention Month, and we're talking with folks about warning signs, but the facts are there's no one set of warning signs that everyone agrees on. And in fact, the things that might be red flags when you're sort of looking back, like when I watched it several times, you sort of watch his nonverbals change before going out in the garage. But I mean, that's just not something that you would be attending to all the time. And so they do sort of miss it, right? Which is not, I mean, this is really, in a lot of ways, and a really humorous show that is really bizarre and far out sometimes, and a fairly accurate depiction of a suicide attempt, which was surprising to me.
Oh, absolutely. I agree completely.
So,
and of these subtle warning signs.
Yeah.
These warning signs are happening throughout the entire series. The fact that his catchphrase, wubba lubba dub dub, his best friend Birdman tells Morty in one of the episodes that it really means, what is it? I'm in great pain. Please help me. Yep. Right. So there's this like consistent catchphrase that he uses throughout the entire series, but they don't know because it's in some weird language. It's so out there that like these are the things that people just don't know how to watch for. And if you want to talk about metaphors, it'd be a really good place to start in terms of people may be trying to tell you what their warning signs are, or in a different language than what you're ready to hear, or what you're able to understand. So that, and really quick, just because this made me think of something. Bart was talking about the metaphor of capitalism for Rick. One of the episodes, it was actually the first Evil Morty episode. he is walking with Morty, and Morty goes, "Rick, why would you want to try to kill yourself, or all the Ricks? Why would you want to kill all the Ricks?" And he goes, "Morty, I wouldn't kill myself."
Ricks because there are multiple universes. You need to explain that to everyone.
All right, there's thousands and thousands of Ricks, an infinite number of Ricks, because there's a Rick for every universe, and there's an infinite number of universes. And also Morty. And for every Rick, there's a Morty, and their brain waves cancel each other out. Anyway, so now that we've established all of that.
That was so helpful. I'm glad April had you explain that, because I think we're clear as mud. Proceed with your dialogue, Chris.
Totally needed to happen.
Very helpful, April. Thank you.
But so Morty goes, "Rick, why would you want to kill yourself, or why would you want to kill all the Ricks, or why would you want to kill any Ricks?" And Rick goes, "I want to kill myself. Where's the profit in that?" And so there's like just a really, really succinct, direct indication that like really it's about him, and it's about trying to further his own motivations, and his motivation here is profit. And what that means we can talk about. But yeah, so Bart's talk about metaphors for capitalism was really good.
In the case of Rick, I don't think it's about money. It seems to be about power, and it seems to be about power over his own skill set. He cares about advancing his own projects. So he's playing a giant game of solitaire.
Oh, yeah.
So solipsism, right? I mean, there's this sense that, in fact, we're our own everything that matters, that exists, is inside of us. But even though he lives that way, he keeps coming back to his family and the original family, right? So he has all these different versions of his family that he could, in fact, connect with, right? But it's really interesting that in one of the episodes I just watched, the end that, in fact, the originals are preserved, right? That these people, the original mom, the original, yeah. So
he destroys them several times over, but then he comes back to them in these in universes that are similar to them. But he doesn't mind wiping them all out. He's done it more than once.
So you've watched more, but in the episode, I just watched, he did that.
But back to suicide prevention, I want to ask Katie and Brandon. So if we were going to, one of the things I loved about your podcast was discussing applicable theories to like how would you sort of psychologically size up Rick? How would you do therapy with him? Because there are some really serious difficulties. And then sort of a step beyond your podcast, how would you deal with sort of risk assessment and safety planning with someone like Rick?
Well, in terms of starting off with the theories, so if we look at, for example, Thomas Joyner's interpersonal theory of suicide, I did some research in graduate school and then early on when I was starting out as a professor, where we looked at whether certain types of impulsivity were related to basically fearlessness about death or acquired capability of suicide. So in Joyner's model, there are 3 parts of the interpersonal theory of suicide, and it suggests that for people to die by suicide, they perceive themselves as a burden, they feel alone or disconnected from others, and they also have a sense of the ability to enact lethal self-harm, which is, fortunately for most of us, there's an instinct of survival that protects us. And so what we found anyway, going back to the research I did, is that sensation seeking for people who tend to get bored easily and seek out sensational things, which Rick certainly does, that those individuals tend to put themselves in situations where they're exposed to a lot of fear, including facing potentially death, and a lot of physically painful type situations, and that tends to lead to an increased capability for suicide. So if they desire suicide, that puts them particularly at risk. And so Rick is very high on that. I think he's very high on sensation seeking and kind of captured there. In terms of belongingness or connectedness, as mentioned, he has some connection to the family, but even that is a little weird and dysfunctional and not like a typical grandpa, I would say.
Goes to family therapy. If you, by the way,
yes,
like if you've not watched Rick and Morty, and you don't want to watch the suicide attempt, but you may not want to watch the family therapy episode because he is disconnected from his family, but he has to show up with a rat bionic pickle. He's really a pickle with rat parts, and he makes it to the family therapy session, right?
Yeah, no, that definitely suggests that he cares to some extent, even though he really tries to act like he doesn't care. And it does seem like there's some debate, from what I understand in fans, about whether like he's drinking to cover the deep emotional pain he has, or he is really just kind of doesn't care that much about other people. And I don't know for sure which way it is, but he has that. And then I mentioned feeling kind of like a burden. Maybe he has a negative effect on people, which I thought was highlighted in the Unity episode. So based on those factors, I think because of his fearlessness about death, that anytime he would desire suicide would be dangerous and high level risk in my opinion.
And we were talking during the pre-show about, and I think, you know, we're talking about a character that is a character with lived experience, which I think is really interesting, and about sort of your dilemma as a therapist. And Marshall Linehan, you know, always says it really well, which is that suicide is a problem for the therapist and a solution for the person in therapy, right? And Rick is like a suicidal Rick. Like a suicide would be a solution to him or a way to escape things. And for us, like he's got this really, really high intellect and all of this, you know, literally science fiction-y access to lethal means, right? And just amazing acquired capability, amazing, like I am amazed at, like we were talking about, how could you possibly prevent him? So we would, as therapists, have that therapeutic dilemma, right? Where we really are responsible to Rick, but we aren't responsible for him. You couldn't stop him from killing himself. Like that's just not within the therapist's power, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's one of the scariest things. It seems like we could try to identify warning signs so that others could recognize it, and we could try to reduce his restriction to means, but there is a part of it that feels wondering if he would ever be willing to engage at all. And I don't know, that makes him at greater risk.
Yeah, absolutely. Just his overall, even just conception of therapy and like therapists, and really, he doesn't think very highly of it. He doesn't see it as at all being scientific, and even describes it as just being talking just to reduce panic, which of course is his perception of it is inaccurate. And I think the therapist in the family therapy episode really does a nice job of sort of reframing and saying, no, Rick, it's boring for you because everything needs to be an adventure for you. That sort of conceptualization of therapy on his part, in addition to, even if we think about you described his garage as sort of being his base, and of course you would maybe want to limit his access to that, but then even in the Toxic Rick episode, when Detox Rick is battling Toxic Rick, there's just weapons all over the living room. He's just grabbing weapons here, and there's little like mutant Morty or Ricks popping out of his chest, so it's just unfathomable to even sort of think about how do you get in front of that or problem solve that.
Right, like, and we were talking about like how you mentioned in your podcast, like about doing motivational interviewing, like he's clearly cares about his family. He's showing up to family therapy. And then like, I loved your podcast, did a wonderful MI, like you really explained what motivational interviewing was. And like, how would you figure out what Rick's motivation was, and how would you connect him with his reasons for living? And I wonder if you guys could talk about that. Just like sneak peek us into the podcast.
Sure. So in terms of motivational interviewing, one thing that I think would be an advantage compared to other approaches, I would guess, is because it doesn't focus on pushing against someone, so it's not challenging someone. So if Rick says, therapy is stupid, you wouldn't reply with, no, it's not, and get into an argument, even though I might want to reply that way. It probably wouldn't go anywhere, but you can motivational interviewing has a nice framework for saying, you think therapy's stupid, there's no reason for you to be here. And then it creates something, and maybe because he has a bit of an oppositionality, and maybe he might even end up arguing for therapy. I don't know if that's hopeful, wishful thinking or something like that.
Or just shoot you with the laser. Like,
equally
honestly, I don't know which way it would go, which makes me glad he's fictional. But no, it's true. I think that like he does, Brendan and I talked about how he does seem to want to be in the house with his family and goes to great lengths with that. And if there were any limits in family therapy set that, like, if you're going to live here, here are some things that might be different. So for example, his drinking all of the time, if that was reduced a little bit, that might reduce his risk. And so perhaps if there were some kind of limits or boundaries set on Beth's end about him being, again, I don't know, I'm totally speculating on very little, but that's one possible way to maybe go.
So, but what I like about this is because it's a fictional character, number one, we can do that. And this is for people who aren't on the inside about how, when therapists are sort of thinking through how to help somebody. I mean, this is how we would think it through, right? If we were staffing a case, like this is how it would sound, which I think is another great part about your podcast is it really explains how you would teach a therapy or what it means to like staff a case, which I think is kind of interesting because folks who are maybe on the outside wouldn't always experience that, but they will through your podcast.
Yeah. So one of the things that was really cool, listening to Brandon and Katie talk about doing therapy with Rick, one of the most powerful things in that podcast was when both Katie and Rick were like, this would be really scary and intimidating if a Rick walked into our offices and we had to treat him, right? This would be and I think that the ability to acknowledge that we hit things that we don't know exactly what to do, that's actually one of the best indicators that you're talking to a really good therapist, right? That ability to lean into uncertainty, and I'm not exactly sure, and to listen to you guys kind of problem solve about what would work and what wouldn't work. I'd be worried about doing this, but just listening to you guys really work on that with this fictional character, though, was an amazing exercise of what I would expect and would really want for people to get when they're in therapy, because we're going to hit situations. I guarantee you, therapists out there, you're going to hit situations where shit's going to happen and you do not know what the right response is. You do not know what is the right thing or the wrong thing to say in that moment. And if you're a therapist and you haven't had that experience, please turn in your license and go ahead and get into, I don't know, work for Amazon. They got lots of opportunities these days.
Well, and like this is definitely a case where, we talk with folks about sort of that sort of tension between folks who are therapists who feel deeply responsible for the actions of our patients who may be at risk, and the people with lived experience who want to retain their self-determination and dignity. And this is a situation where there is no involuntary commitment that's ever going to happen with Rick. So like in some ways, this is a character that sort of takes all of that ability to take his decisions away off the table in a lot of respects. So you really must this is like level setting therapy, which is, what we say is the ideal, but it's very tense and interesting. We've had a lot of memeing about Pickle Rick. For those who don't know about this, can someone like Brandon, Katie, can you guys like sort of give everybody a little Pickle Rick background?
Yeah, I can give a really quick Pickle Rick synopsis. So Pickle Rick, which I think is probably now the most popular sort of Rick and Morty anything. I think that's speculation, but I'm pretty sure he is. And Katie gets a little squeamish when I talk about Pickle Rick, as evidenced by the podcast. But Pickle Rick came about when Rick was trying to avoid attending the family therapy session, and Morty is kind of cruising around the house, and he hears, Morty, come out here. And he walks out and sees a pickle on the counter or on the workbench that rolls over, and it's Rick. And he says, "Hey, I'm Pickle Rick." Sort of like he always says, like, I'm Tiny Rick. This time he's Pickle Rick. And through a series of unfortunate events involving a cat thinking that Pickle Rick might be a snake and batting him off the workbench and the pickle serum being taken away, or anti-pickle serum, he ends up in the sewer and somehow devises almost a miniature factory that takes rat parts. It starts with a cockroach and then moves on to a rat, and he builds himself an exoskeleton out of a rat rib cage and skeleton and rat body parts, and somehow gets into a war with some sort of mob in their building, I think. Ultimately, like, it's just the most outrageous sort of thing. And I think the contrast is quite striking, because in the one part of the episode we continue to see the family therapy session, and then we see Pickle Rick in a rat exoskeleton battling with weapons that he's created.
By the way, I recently learned that Pickle Rick series was based off of Breaking Bad, another very interesting show.
What?
Yes.
What?
Yeah, the whole Pickle Rick combat thing, apparently the creators had Breaking Bad in mind, so that's kind of fun. Not the pickle part, but the other stuff.
See, this is one of those deals where this is why I like that you've taken this wonderful geek culture and then used it as an entree for the mental health sort of world, because everybody, well, I don't know, everybody but maybe Bart has seen Breaking Bad.
I've seen Breaking Bad, April. But I bailed on Breaking Bad when the little kid got killed. That was it for me. I got some things.
Oh.
When the little kid got killed, that was like, for some reason, there was a fun edge to the show, and only really bad guys, or when the kid got killed, it like something soured on me. I just something about that.
You didn't watch it all the way to Felina?
I didn't watch. I don't. When the little kid got killed, there was something about that just got too dark for me. I lost interest.
Man, I felt like that last season of Breaking Bad. Like, you're talking about psychological profiles. Like that was like the circle is now complete. I'm not saying it was emotionally edifying. It's not going to ever like debut on the Hallmark Network, right? But I'm seeing Brandon and Katie nod their heads. What do y'all think?
Oh yeah, I agree completely. That's among my favorite TV shows ever. I thought it was really powerful stuff, and it's one of those characters like Walter White definitely deserves like a Jedi Council breakdown, but he's one of these ones that's sort of in the backlog now because there's so much new good stuff coming out that someday we'll get back to him. But yeah, I agree.
This sort of, I think what's amazing about your format is that you will never run out of content.
Yeah.
Right? Have you heard about Steven Stack?
I have not.
No, I haven't either.
Oh no.
So
we know Steven Stack.
no, he's been a guest on SPSM, and this is what he does. So he's very interested in suicide depictions in the movies. So for the last 20 years, for 30 minutes every night, he makes his wife sit down and watch 30 minutes of a movie that has.
She may love it. He may not make her do it.
I've met her.
It's non-consensual.
And they code for research purposes movies with suicide in them, and they're like way past 1,000 movies at this point, and they're thinking of TV content. And he's like, it's just people make content so fast, right? Like it's faster than you can code it or talk about it. So what's next? So I know that you're talking about doing sort of an all Rick and Morty podcast just because it's such a dense topic and it's in everybody's consciousness. But like in terms of programming and mental health content and topics that you're going to be covering, what's coming up?
Next, actually, this week we're having an episode on Winona Earp.
I love Winona Earp. Sorry.
Oh no, I love Winona Earp too. It's my favorite, like currently running show. And we actually are really lucky. We have a health psychologist who's going to be a guest on who studies stress and pregnancy. So it's going to give us an opportunity to talk about mental health, physical health associated with pregnancy, and also geek out about Winona Earp.
And it has a second season come on yet, and I just haven't been tracking that.
It's not on Netflix. I bought it on Amazon because I couldn't wait. Did I just spoil something? I'm sorry.
No.
Okay.
I
Did you know she was pregnant?
I have ways of getting it out.
Okay. Yeah, it gets even better in the second season. And of course, in the first season, you can see there are some alcohol issues. And actually, they talk about her having mental health, like understandably having problems associated with some of the trauma that she experienced when she was younger and kind of piecing that together.
And so if she's got to give up drinking while being pregnant, that's going to be real interesting, isn't it?
Yeah, definitely.
Okay, so great. If there is any suicide-related content, Winona Earp, like, come on back.
We'll be happy to.
Absolutely.
That is fun because Doc Holliday is also a fairly interesting, like from a psychological standpoint, interesting character and all of that.
Definitely, and some interesting things happen that I won't spoil for you that I think even further develop his character in season 2.
Woo-hoo! If he didn't have a mustache, I'd be totally into it.
Yeah. He still has a mustache, though. That's not the interesting development that he shaves it or something.
Damn it!
Sorry.
So as we're closing up, we've just got a couple minutes until final thoughts. What are some things, what are some of the content or episodes that you might pitch or recommend? I know we put some in the blog, but that you think might be interesting to SPSM. Can you do like a 2 or 3 minute recommended playlist?
One of our most listened to episode ever actually is about some of the history of the DSM and lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender individuals. And we link it to a comic book that came out that was a tribute to after the Pulse Orlando shooting. And so it's kind of a compilation, gives a very basic overview of the history. We also have done we did a couple episodes on the movie Get Out. So I don't know if you all saw that, but there's a mental health professional who does some weird stuff, and then also gives an opportunity to talk about some of the interactions between racism and mental health.
Mm-hmm.
We have a series of myth episodes where we have guests on, who are mostly my friends who I work with, to talk about substance use myths, myths about bullying, brain myths.
Mm-hmm.
Wow. So those were all the links you sent me, right? So they can all find that in spsmchat.com. But can you let people know?
At least I'm consistent.
Can you let people know like how they can go find your podcast? You're at like almost 70 episodes at this point, right?
I think so. Yeah, just mid 60s, I think now. Yeah, we're getting close to 70. Yeah, you can. So we have a website, www.jedi-counsel.com. Of counsel, of course, COUNSEL. Kind of a little play on words there. On there, you'll find all of our blog posts, and we also have links to all of our podcasts on there with a brief description of each episode. The podcasts are available on Podbean or iTunes or Stitcher, so they're available fairly widely. Yeah, so that's where all of our content's kind of hosted. We have a Twitter and Facebook page. We're pretty active on both. I think we really like to. I think our favorite part about a lot of this is engaging with people who are really kind and generous enough to take time to listen to the show. So we really appreciate just visiting with people. And in terms of future directions for characters, ideally we'd like to get it to a point that we have enough folks listening that they'll just suggest characters that they think are cool enough, and that will just give us an excuse to say, well, I guess I have to watch this season.
Steven
Universe. Yeah,
totally like the presence of like female characters and the way that they do all that. It's like super interesting, and Rebecca Sugar does an amazing job, and the plots are great, and my kids and I talk about it all the time. And you totally have to do Steven Universe just for me and my kids.
Okay. That's fair.
It is now time. This is the time on Sprockets. I know that totally dates me. That's like a 25-year-old reference.
I got you though. Like Meyer, Saturday Night Live.
Totally. That was my era, right? Where we do final thoughts. Tony Wood, final thoughts.
Rick and Morty, psychoactive, psychobabble, psychotherapy, psychopath. Have a great time with it if you haven't seen it yet. It's a wonderful series, and the Jedi Council does a great job of covering it. You'll love
it. Bart Andrews.
Final thoughts. Check out the Jedi Council podcast and the blog. Amazing content. I think the thing that I love the most is that, and you even mentioned this on the podcast, we work really hard at our jobs, and finding an artistic outlet, or finding different ways, tangential ways to connect our profession with entertainment, with art, with other aspects of ourselves is really cool. And my final comment is you just have to listen to Katie and Brandon as they talk to each other. There's such a connection, and you never know where their conversation is going to go, and there's a genuineness and a richness in the relationship. And it's one of the things that you know, kind of getting into the groove, that first podcast, it was like by halfway through the podcast, like, okay, this is absolutely fascinating, and I can listen to you guys for hours. Keep up the good work, and if you haven't listened to these two, get out there and check out the podcast. It's amazing.
Chris Maxwell.
Yeah, this is Rick and Morty is just another great example of how sci-fi and popular entertainment can be used to make it easier to talk about mental health issues, and make it and put it into platforms that are entertaining and engaging in ways that people are going to watch. So to be able to talk about mental health, suicide, all these things in a pressureless area is amazing. So. And I'll second what Bart just said. Go check out the podcast, especially the Rick and Morty podcasts from Jedi Counsel. Brandon and Katie, you were awesome. Thank you so much.
And Brandon and Katie, final thoughts.
Well, I guess I'll start by just saying thank you to all of you, which is like an initial thank you before my final thought. We've been a fan of all of you for a while, and to be on here is actually pretty surreal and awesome. So thank you all. It's greatly appreciated. And thank you for the incredibly kind words. Just the fact that anyone is willing to listen to us ramble on is just, it means a lot to me. So to be able to connect with so many cool people, it's been an absolute pleasure. And that sort of leads me into my final thought, which is, My final thought is embrace your geekiness. We all work, like Bart said, and we all work incredibly hard, and we all are doing everything we can, but being able to embrace that geekiness and tie my professional interests into my personal interests has been one of the most absolutely rewarding things that I've pursued. Being able to meet amazing people like all of you and all of the really incredible folks I've gotten to connect with on Twitter and Facebook and other podcasts and conventions, it's opened up a lot of really amazing connections and opportunities, and it's allowed me to really grow and develop in a major way. So, and it just was all about just saying I'm totally cool. I geek out about Batman, and that's where it really started. Batman and Star Wars and all this stuff that I really loved, and it led to all this. So I would just encourage everyone to really embrace that side of themselves.
Katie.
My final thought, first of all, ditto to everything Brandon said. And secondly, I think the biggest thing for me is thinking outside of the box in terms of helping people and reaching them and connecting with them about mental health issues. Publishing papers, that's very important to our field, but dissemination is very important, and something I've learned as a professor. Publishing things is part of it, but another part of it is in teaching and talking to students individually and presenting information in a way that resonates with them, and then having them come talk to me about how it meant something to them, or there's someone in their life that's doing that. A lot of that has really inspired doing this, because it's another way to have this conversation that feels more personal, more tailored, and maybe less intimidating than some of the more formal type of mental health stuff. So think outside of the box for suicide prevention is my final thought.
This is my final thought. You've spent another hour with us. We're so grateful to have you. Definitely go follow Jedi Counsel on Facebook and Twitter. Let them know what you would like them to cover in the podcast. Let us know what topics in suicide prevention, social media, and innovative technology you would like to see us react to or cover. We want to know, because we are here to help spread content and expertise at the speed of new media. They do a wonderful job. You're going to have a good time. And once you've heard one of those podcasts, just like we did, you can't listen and then not have your own opinion, which is great. The great part about social media is now you've seen Brandon and Katie. They're totally approachable. Feed right back to them. This social media is a conversation. It's not a lecture. Thank you so much for joining us. Everybody have a great week. We may have a little surprise in store for next week. Talk with you soon. Bye-bye.
Peace.